Okay, we're live. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Holy Humanist. We're starting bright and early today for considering the normal timings we have. So I'm really hoping a lot of people in Europe will be happy with this timing tonight. Hi, John. Hi, Bernice. Hi to all the regulars. Dee. Um, Sorry if I've missed you. Hannah, hi. Grey Jedi, Kiko. Okay, so today we have a really fun stream. We're going to delve into the Islamic Golden Age and maybe the not so golden age, we'll see. But we've got a very, very special guest with us. He is an author and a history buff. So I've done an interview with him before. I will link it in the description when we're done, so you guys can go and check that out as well. But it's been a long, long time, and he's done a lot of work since. So I'm very excited to welcome Jason Sylvester to Holy Humanist. Hi, Jason. Welcome.
Hi, Nuria. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Thank you for being here. So, Jason, like I said, it's been a while, obviously, since we last kind of caught up and had a chat like this.
Yep.
And you've actually done a lot since then. So, yeah, can you just kind of, I guess, from just my audience, give us a brief introduction as to who you are and the work you're doing overall? And I know you're doing stuff on YouTube as well. So I have posted Jason's link here, and I'm going to share my screen. And we are going to watch a little bit of one of his videos if possible. But yeah, Jason, take it away.
Okay. Yeah, thanks, Nuria. So yeah, I have done a lot, not as much as I would like to have done. My job kept me quite busy over the last year and a half, so I didn't get nearly as much work done as I had wanted to. Uh, in the last several months, when did I start? I think started February. I had the idea. Someone told me long ago. Our last chat, I mentioned I was working in Pakistan in 2018, and some of my friends in Pakistan had suggested that I start doing like short little video summaries, which I finally gotten around to doing. So I've created 6 months of content based on the work in the books that I'm writing. I'm actually writing. It's sort of become two separate books. It's one book is called Dangerous Ideas, which is the history of how the world became secular. Like I had this idea, like in 1600 the church burnt Giordano Bruno alive at the stake, and today people like Richard Dawkins and Sam Harris, Christopher Hitchens, Daniel Dennett, the Four Horsemen, they're all international celebrities. And like, how do we go from burning people at the stake for thinking to atheists being international celebrities? So I sat down to write that history of how people advanced the knowledge in the scientific frontiers, started questioning nature, how they were looking for natural explanations instead of God did it. And then what was sort of the reaction to those people, like who was killed, who was silenced, how did they then go on to influence other people, and how did they take the ball and advance the goal lines, or advance toward the goal line of a secular world. um, each chapter in Dangerous Ideas, which is still in progress, is its own era. So I started with classical antiquity, with the ancient Greeks and the Romans, who were looking at how the natural world worked. And then chapter two is the rise of the Catholic Church and how Christianity in Western Europe basically came to dominate and suppress secular learning for 1,000 years, and then picks up again in the Renaissance. Um, but I went beyond the Renaissance for that chapter, where I wanted to bring it up to today, like everything that the Catholic Church has done, like from over its 2,000 year history, or almost 2,000 year history. So I'm up to the Nazis in 1933 and the Concordat that they negotiated with the Vatican right now. But that chapter, because it's spanning 2,000 years, has become a book all by itself, which I'm calling Sins of the Fathers, because it's basically detailing all the lies, fabrications, and just outright myths that the Catholic Church has made up about itself, like about the primacy of the Bishop of Rome, and things like that. And so the content that I'm starting to spin off. So I said I've created 6 months of content. I've released the first. I've got 4 series. I've released the first video of the first 3, and the first video of the 4th series will come out uh, this weekend. Be Friday night in the U.S. and Saturday morning in Europe and Asia. And so the first series is Vatican Lies. So as I mentioned, all of the fabrications and the connections between the two. So there's it goes chronologically. So the myth of Peter, how and when that got started, which pope was the first to claim primacy through Peter, how did later popes then start accruing power, and bringing all of that in, and then other lies that come after that, such as like the donation of Constantine is probably the most famous one, where that comes from and how it impacted political relations in Europe, and then how it got debunked. But then the third video is my influencer series. So the one that just came out last week, which is what we're here to talk about, and that talks about these people, as I mentioned, who advanced the frontiers of knowledge and science and ultimately secularism. So, but in the first video, I lay down the context of what happened. So with uh, the Codex of Justinian, which gets rediscovered in 1076 in Italy, and then the Charlemagne. So back up a little bit. So Charlemagne, who establishes cathedral schools, which go on to become universities, and right at the time that cathedral schools are becoming universities is when all of the knowledge of the Islamic Golden Age is discovered in Toledo in Spain and starts flooding into Europe, which then creates these universities. And as we know, universities are bastions of critical thinking, and critical thinking challenges revealed authority and gives us the secular world that we have today.
I felt like saying amen for that.
Or ramen if you're a pastafarian.
Yeah, exactly. Wow,
Pass the
Jason.
garlic bread and have some communion wine.
Yeah, cheers to that. But no, you've absolutely, I can't believe, obviously we always think we could have done more, but you've absolutely, I mean, the how thorough your work is and like what you're documenting now in these books, I think is quite a game changer, because just the scope of history that you go into, and then it's really kind of detailing just it just in general, like I guess the tapestry of human history and how we've got to where we are today, and it all kind of starts to make sense. And that's why I felt like this topic was really interesting as well, because obviously the Islamic claim to the golden age is one that we're very much aware of, but then really and truly I wanted to like get your thoughts and see your understanding of it in terms of like an era where there was so much knowledge being passed through various civilizations and being collected and collated in one space. Obviously, you mentioned it in your video as well, with like the invention of paper and the fact that the Muslims got their hands on that. But so I did share your YouTube channel while you were talking, because I think what you're doing in book form, no, you're welcome. You're also kind of transposing that into a series on YouTube, which is very exciting. And like you said, that's what we're here to talk about today. So yeah, let me just see if this works. Let's is it okay if we play a bit of your video to start with?
Yeah, no problem. Go ahead.
Okay, let me know if you guys can hear this. Okay. Can you hear that, Jason?
No.
No, okay. Yeah, see, I don't know how to switch the sound. Okay. Anyway, this is Jason's video on it's the part one of the influencer series, basically, as Jason was saying. And I loved it, Jason. Honestly, I think it's like the perfect length of time, where you can actually retain the information that you're dropping so much knowledge in it, but it's done in a way which you can retain, and the chronology of the way you take us through it is good. Obviously, the graphics as well really help. So yeah, please do go and check out that video. It's really educational. But yeah, I guess let's start then unpacking the topic at hand.
Sure.
Jason. So wherever you kind of like to start off from, and then I guess we can unravel and take some questions and see where we go.
Okay. All right. So let me try to step through it. So I rewatched the video this afternoon. One of the things in the description for the video is a link to a documentary from the 80s. So those people who, it's mostly British, but it was aired around the world. It was called The Day the Universe Changed by James Burke. And then he had a later series called Connections. So I was very, very inspired by James Burke and this series, and that's why like my videos and my writing is all very connection based. That trying like the connecting the dots between these events. And so there's actually a link in the description for the video to Daily Motion, where it has the episode 2 of The Day the Universe Changed, where he talks about a lot of this information of the Islamic Golden Age. I would invite people to go and watch it. It's fascinating. I watched that again this afternoon. So at the beginning of my video, I talk about Justinian. So Justinian compiles the Codex, which is a series of laws, but it's exclusionary to some extent. Public teachers or teachers who are drawing a public salary must be Christian, and only Roman imperial Christians. They cannot be some heretical form of Christian. Some scholars, some philosophers left the Roman Empire. Some of them went to Persia, and so the end of classical antiquity is really hard to date. But a lot of scholars will say that the issuing of the Codex, and some people claim it was the closing of the philosophy schools, which wasn't really true because they were private schools. It was only public people drawing a public salary had to be Christian, and so then that gets lost. So the people. Greek philosophy really comes to be forgotten in the Latin West. Following the collapse of the Western Roman Empire, the East and West really drift into two separate spheres, and that's why so much of Greek philosophy is forgotten in the Latin West, and Greek becomes increasingly unknown to even the priests. So basically, it's only the priests who are literate, and they're all speaking Latin. Even Saint Augustine, admits that his Greek was very poor, and that's partly where the doctrine of original sin comes from. Is he misunderstood Paul's Greek, and so we got the doctrine of original sin. But that's a tangent we won't go down. That's a subject for another day. Excuse me, I have a cold, so apologies to our viewers.
That's okay.
The Greek learning, Greek wisdom gets lost, along with Justinian's Codex gets lost. Okay, so then we skip ahead. So let me just back up just a little bit before Charlemagne. So the Council of Chalcedon in 451 is another one of the great ecumenical councils, like Nicaea, like Constantinople, where they're debating the nature of Jesus. At the Council of Chalcedon in 451, the doctrine, the two substance God, Jesus is God, and God, both God and human. I believe he was Bishop Nestorius. I believe was the Bishop of Constantinople at the time, and he ends up losing it at Council of Chalcedon, or his followers end up losing, and they move to what is modern day Syria. They're called the Syriac Christians, and they are called Nestorians. And they break from what is known as Roman Imperial Christianity, or what the Orthodox Christians and the Roman Catholic Church. They follow the Chalcedonian formula. They are part of Roman Imperial Christianity because the emperors are the ones who called the councils and dictated that. And that'll be in other future videos I do. So the Nestorians Christians then, the Syriac Christians then translate Greek philosophy into Syriac, and then later they move even further. They become known as the Church of the East, and they basically move to Persia and Iraq and that area. And then so following the Muslim conquest, they then translate all of this Greek wisdom they've translated into Syriac Christian into Arabic. Okay, so then so then we jump back to Charlemagne. So then Charlemagne, I don't remember the exact year. Charlemagne issues the Admonitio Generalis, which decrees that every monastery and cathedral will create a school to educate the men. Obviously, women don't count back then, as they do in many cultures today, sadly, but to educate men. So Charlemagne needs capable administrators to run his empire, but he wants good priests who are dedicated to Christianity and will increase the Christianity of his empire. So he creates all of these cathedral schools to strengthen Christianity within the empire. And this is what I say in the video. he gets a future that he didn't intend
I love
because
that. I love that
yeah,
line.
right. So the law, I love this, the law of unintended consequences. I'm
Yeah,
always talking about the law of unintended consequences. So by about
appreciate it.
1200, the cathedral schools have merged, have morphed into universities. And we all know what happens in universities, that we challenge um, revealed authority. Now, all the universities at the time, like the Sorbonne, which is the theology school of the University of Paris, Oxford, Cambridge, these are all essentially training ground for the priests. I mean, like a university education, more or less, was to train you to be a priest for hundreds and hundreds of years. But there were a handful of these. There was a subset of these people who, obviously realized, hey, there's more going on here than just spiritual revelation. We can't just accept the authority of the Bible. We need to question. We need to push the boundaries, and that's exactly what's happened over universities. And it's really only been, say, like the last 150 years. I came across it 10 years ago, but I haven't been able to refind it. That up until about 1850-ish, I can't remember. Like even Oxford and Cambridge had like you had to be like Church of England to go, and that's where I want to say John Stuart Mill, but that doesn't sound. Maybe he's right. I think it was University College London was actually started as a secular university because Oxford and Cambridge, you had to be Church of England to get in. So it's really only been like 150 years that like the
Wow.
religious qualifications of even like the universities in England have dropped these religious qualifications and they've become truly secular institutions. And these institutions have obviously, math and science, medicine have really pushed the boundaries of where we are. And the spirit of free thinking in these universities has created the secular world that we're in. But that would not have happened without the knowledge of the Islamic Golden Age. So to jump back again to 750, as you mentioned in the introduction. So
Jason, I'm so
that
sorry. It's just
yeah,
really funny to think that that's probably why, like even today, Oxford and stuff still have the most like robust theology degrees and courses offered
probably
over everyone.
yeah probably
Yeah, but yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
okay. So going back to this, so contemporary with Charlemagne. So Charlemagne, he died in 814. He actually lived quite a long time. He was like king of the Franks before he was the Holy Roman Emperor. Um, so in about 750, the Abbasid Caliphate, based in Baghdad, fought the Battle of Talis against the Tang Chinese, and they beat the Tang Chinese. And now Central Asia has been Muslim ever since. But amongst the Tang army were the craftsmen who knew how to make paper. And Samarkand in modern day Uzbekistan became the center of paper making for the Muslim world. And paper is how you disseminate knowledge, right? In Europe, they're using parchment, which is expensive. It's not easy to work with. It's hard to make, whereas paper is fairly easy. It's light. So paper is the hallmark of the Islamic Golden Age. So because the Abbasid Caliphate discovers the secret of papermaking from the Chinese, they have this explosion of this dissemination of knowledge that spans the entire, from the steppes of Central Asia all the way to Andalusian Spain, um, that has all of this knowledge. So hang on, I made a note. Let me just pull up my notes. So in The Day of the Universe Changed, he mentions, okay, in the Library of Cordoba in Spain, they had 440,000 books, and there were 69 other libraries in Cordoba, and that's just in Cordoba. There's Toledo, there's Granada. Um, uh, One of the things that really annoys the hell out of me in what was it? Let me pull it back up again. 1449, I think. Yeah, 1499. The Archbishop of Toledo. So after the Reconquista of Spain with Isabel Ferdinand, they kicked out the Moors, the Muslims in Spain. 1499, the Bishop of Toledo burned the Library of Granada, except for the medical texts. But they burned the library and everything, and that just, oh,
I
it's
know the amount of libraries that have been
yeah.
burnt throughout the course of human history
Yeah.
is appalling.
So
The
then
amount of
what? So and James Burke makes a really interesting point in the day the universe changed. Again, it's just episode 2. The link is in the description for my video. So he talks about El Cid, and El Cid being this Christian propaganda, like he's this mercenary that, he's this Christian crusader. But no, he was a paid mercenary. Half his army were other Arabs, and most of the time they were being paid by Arab clients to attack other Arab client states in Spain. So Burke makes a really interesting point that the fall of Toledo was not really a fall, because the Christian king who ended up taking over was friends with the king, the Muslim king of Toledo, and I guess he was afraid of being poisoned by a rival, so he decides to step down, and Alfonso VI, the Christian king, comes in and takes over ruling Toledo. And then what do they find? What do the Christians who come in find? They find the Library of Toledo packed with all of this information: math, astronomy, engineering, medicine, just architecture, and it just blows their minds. So what happens? And the phrase that James Burke uses is, drew every major scholar in Europe like moths to a flame. So all of these Christian scholars come flooding into Toledo in 1085, and they start translating all of this information. And interestingly, it's the Spanish Jews who can speak Arabic and Latin, who they sort of like middlemen. So they translate the Arabic into Castilian, and then the Castilian gets translated into Latin. And they said it takes about 150 years. Okay, so that's 1085. In 1076, the Codice, Justinian's Codex, gets rediscovered in Bologna. Bologna is the first university in Europe. The rediscovery of Justinian's Codex makes Bologna a center of law studies. And then in 1085, you get this influx of the translation. So the translations start coming, and he said it's about 150 years. So around 11, so say like around 1190-ish. So he says all of this information, all these translations start flooding into Europe. Now, this is the same time that Oxford and the University of Paris get their charter. So Oxford gets its royal charter in 1214, and the University of Paris gets its charter in 1215. But it's in like between like 1175 and 1200 that all of this information comes flooding into these cathedral schools and transforms them into universities. So without all of that Greek knowledge and Arabic knowledge, which contains not just all of this Arabic astronomy and math and science, they discover, hang on, this Aristotle and all of this Greek philosophy that we lost several hundred years ago. Like only 2 of Aristotle's works survived in Latin. Only 2. And so it all comes flooding back into Europe, and it changed. I love James Burke's description. It blew everything apart, and it just totally transforms universities, and the battles and the fights that is going on. Like the Bishop of Paris and the Pope are trying to suppress it. So, like what happened with the Islamic Golden Age comes to an end, as we know. There's varying stages where it comes to an end in different parts of the empire. But it's kind of funny that Christianity and Islam have kind of followed the same path. So, Christianity absorbed Platonism and then basically shut itself down after that. They said, like, no more secular learning. And then Islam had this big boom for a couple of hundred years. So, I mean, think about it. Like, so the paper was 750. The fall of Toledo was 1085. So that's 350 years that the Muslims had of this explosion of intellectual growth. And then they go into their own dark ages, to misappropriate a bad term. They go into their own dark ages. But the Christians have their enlightenment, and I'm pretty sure the Muslim enlightenment is coming. I mean, the growth of the ex-Muslim community, I think, is a good sign that the Muslim enlightenment is around the corner within the next century or two. So
yeah, no, I really sincerely hope so. And I think the internet, like Mariam Namazi says, is going to be the vehicle to do that.
Exactly.
Exactly how the printing press was to Christianity.
The democratization of information. They can't hide it anymore.
Exactly that. Okay, Jason, a couple of things that I wanted to touch on, but just to kind of finish the holistic approach to the Islamic Golden Age, so to speak. In your video, you mentioned that some people say, some scholars argue that it was with the death of Ghazali that they thought that put an end to the typical I guess the search outside of theological philosophy. All of that was come to like a halt. Is that kind of your personal opinion as well? Can you just kind of shed some light on that?
Okay, so yeah, so that's a good point. I talk about that in the video as well. So Al-Ghazali was a Persian scholar who died in 1111. He was quite opposed to this kind of scholarship, and I have a quote. So from my section, let me just pull that up so I can get it right. So, okay, yeah. So Al-Ghazali writes a book called The Incoherence of the Philosophers, basically against people like Ibn Sina, Ibn Rushd, because he feels it's being used to question the received wisdom of the Quran. And so he marks the rejection of this thinking within Islam. But as I mentioned, it goes on. So it dies in some places, but not in others. So Ibn Rushd, also known as Averroes, he wrote a book called The Incoherence of the Incoherence, refuting Al-Ghazali. But it was kind of too late. Al-Ghazali was kind of the start of it. It wasn't like a terminal end of the Islamic Golden Age, but it was the start of the end, because the House of Wisdom in Baghdad, where a lot of the scholarship was done, went on to like 1258. I think it was 1258. So when the Mongols sacked it, where is it? Let me just find it. House of Wisdom. Nope, it's not in this one. Okay, I thought I had it here. Okay, it was about 1258 that the Mongols sacked the House of Wisdom in Baghdad. So some people point to that. So that's another 150 years after Al-Ghazali. But you've got the Timurid Renaissance in Central Asia, where Samarkand, where paper was discovered. And you have Ulugh Beg in the 1300s, who is one of the most remarkable astronomical scholars. And it's not just him. He's got a whole team of brilliant astronomers and mathematicians working with him. And I looked it up this afternoon, but I couldn't find it. I wanted to see if there was an actual percentage. But most of our star names are Arabic because they come from all of these Muslim astronomers, not just in Ulugh Beg's territory in Samarkand, but spanning the Islamic world. So like there's something like 200 visible stars have Arabic names, something like that. But I don't know the exact percentage, but like the majority of our stars have Arabic names. And Ulugh Beg in 1300 and something made a calculation of the solar year that was only off by a minute from our modern observations. So, and this goes on so for what, another 300-400 years after Al-Ghazali. So Al-Ghazali he marks the beginning of the end, but it's not the end, because again, it goes on at the House of Wisdom in Baghdad for another 150 years, and then it's going on in Samarkand for another 150 years after that.
Yeah, no, awesome, because that's a great segue, which I wanted to touch on that and ask you something. But as well, I can see there's a couple of really interesting comments from Snowy Keep and a couple of other people. I have starred them, and we will discuss them. So yeah, your comments are not being overlooked, don't worry. But yeah, Jason, so that's a really good point, because so as you mentioned, like even if you were to take Ghazali as the beginning of the end, as you said, there were pockets or certain regions of the world where there was still a bit more scope to explore that kind of, philosophical like dimension, I guess. And I think you mentioned who was it, Ulugh Beg in your video?
Ulugh Beg, who
Ulugh
was
Beg,
part of the Timurid Renaissance in Samarkand.
Right, exactly. And so even up until the present day today, we see such a different form of Islam, that's apparent in those regions. So even connecting with Muslims from there, they really have, first of all, a lot of them are very heavily Sufi inclined. They really focus on the inward and, the spiritual connection with God. And they're not really literalists. They take everything to have a lot more kind of depth and meaning than, say, this Salafist interpretation of reading the Quran, or more of a Wahhabi interpretation of reading the Quran. And do you think that's literally a leftover of the way that their history played out vis-a-vis where it was playing out in, like, the actual, like, Middle East, or around, like, in Arabia and the surrounding areas, or even where Islam went in its medieval period, and, like, when there was a lot of jihad and the great expansion of Islam? Do
Well,
you think that has any bearings in Central Asia?
a lot of it, and I make this point repeatedly, that religion is always political. There's nothing to do with God. It's always political. And Wahhabism is a fairly recent invention to radicalize the people in Saudi. Um, we may have talked about it on our previous show we were together. So for people who don't know, I worked in Pakistan in 2018, and a lot of my friends told me that, following the partition of Pakistan, like for the first few decades, Pakistan was really quite an open, tolerant, secular society. Yes, it was a Muslim country, but it was really quite tolerant. It was Zia ul Haq who weaponized Islam to radicalize the populace to support his dictatorship. So where you see these pockets of radical fundamentalism, it's always political, because somebody has stirred up the plebeians, you know. And in other cultures where it's like, look at Turkey. Modern Turkey was founded as a secular state. We saw in the election a couple of weeks ago, there was great hope that Erdogan would be turfed out, because he's been trying to drag the country into a more Islamist Islamist state from its secular, and a lot of Turks aren't happy about that. Look at what in Iran prior to the Iranian Revolution in '79. Iran was open, it was tolerant. Women didn't have the hijab, which has like been the focus of all of these protests over the last several months. So it's always political. So where you have a much more relaxed and open government, where they're not stirring up the people into fundamentalism, yeah, you'll probably have much more tolerant Muslims. And there's sort of the flip side of that coin is, and you see this in Christianity, you see this in Judaism as well, where you have fundamentalist, highly oppressive, you get the flip side of that, where you get people who rebel. Like you grow up in this hyper repressive religious culture, and you grow up and you just rebel against it. So even within Islam, like I've said repeatedly, there are a lot more ex-Muslims or Muslim atheists out there than we know of. They just can't put their hand up and say, I'm here, because they're risking their life in the culture that they live in. But
yeah, I always say, Jason, like, the day that the blasphemy laws are eradicated from Islam, it's going to be an absolute tsunami.
Yep.
The numbers are probably through the roof. The amount of people that are, closeted and living in fear for coming out. And we can never, no survey would capture what's happening, but it's definitely happening.
Yeah.
So Jason, just to also touch on, so there's a couple of things obviously with the Islamic Golden Age, and I think it's fair for us to kind of challenge some of their notions, and I think that's what a couple of people in the comments are alluding to as well, because it did play out that way in history, as you mentioned. But even for example, like a claim, so there's a lot of big claims that Muslims make that transpire during what they call the Islamic Golden Age. I'm just going to list off a couple, but they claim, and I'll just dive into this one with you a little bit, but they basically claim they've invented the universities,
Yep.
and we will unpack that because that's important. But also that they invented numbers and the camera obscura, that they invented modern pharmacy, the first hospital, the first world map. They were the first to calculate the circumference of the Earth when the Quran says the Earth is flat. So I'm not sure how they did
I dispute that one.
but there's a couple here, right? So they invented ethanol, they invented chess. The list goes on if you really want to dive into some of these Muslim websites. and the kind of grandiose claims that they make for themselves. So just on the first one, because you kind of touched on a couple of universities from the Western world, and obviously, how they came about and how secularism and free thinking became synonymous with universities and higher education. The one thing you do also say in your video perfectly, and that's what I mean, credit where credit's due, that in that phase, the Muslims did come up with, I guess, the concept of specializing in a degree. And I think even beyond that, Jason, you were mentioning that the Rose and the whole diploma system.
Yep, all came from. So at the same time, all this information is coming. So the universities transform, and you have professors, you have robes, you have degrees and specialization. So that all comes with it.
Yeah, so, exactly. But,
excuse me. Circumference of the Earth, I would dispute. I think Eratosthenes, forgive me if I mispronounce his name. Eratosthenes was, I believe, an Egyptian. I don't know if he was Greek Egyptian, like a Ptolemaic. I can't remember. And this was long before Islam came along, I believe. I can't remember exactly when Eratosthenes lived, but he calculated the circumference of the Earth.
to 194 BC.
Yeah. So way long before the Muslims. So so that one's no.
Yeah, exactly that. And just for people listening again, like, that the claim about the university as well, I was going to do a separate video on this, but essentially the university that they say was the first one is called the University of Al-Qarawiyyin, and it was created by a lady called Fatima, and that was the first university in the world. However, obviously, there were plenty of universities, and I know a lot of the nationalistic Hindus would definitely know all the universities that India had way prior to that. But even this claim, it's relating to a little area that she had built to pray in private. And then essentially when Muslims gained control of the area and then the Christians were paying them jizya, they were able to use that money to turn it into a bigger mosque. And then it became a madrasa. And again, a madrasa was only to propagate Islamic thought and Islamic theology and philosophy within the confines of Islam. And yes, that's when they started specializing in, as Jason was saying as well, like the kind of, I guess, what would you call it? Like the decorum and the just the due process of a university and how you kind of graduate and that whole kind of thing. And then we move on and we see, actual free thought being propagated in universities in the Western world. But yeah, that's one of their claims. I don't know, Jason, if you wanted to comment on that as well.
I read, there's a book, I love this book. It's Peter Frankopan. He's another Oxford professor. He could be Cambridge. They're called The Silk Road. Silk Road is another one of those books that's just jam-packed with really interesting facts.
Jason, I've tried to read it 5 times and I'm still like, I can't get the information. I need to do it again.
Oh, it's a fabulous book. I love it.
Amazing book, yeah.
He made the point that the Muslims actually borrowed the university idea from the Buddhists. Now, I asked an Islamic scholar about that. I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but he's a highly respected American Islamic scholar, and I asked him about that, and he's like, "I've never heard that before, so I don't know where Frankopan got it." But Frankopan says they got it from the Buddhist schools. So it is highly possible that the Muslims got it from India or Thailand, wherever those Buddhist schools might have been. So that's possible. The numbering system, no, they got that from the Indians. Like the zero, the concept of zero comes from India. What we know today as Arabic numerals are Indian. So they bring all of this in. I mentioned in the book, I get it from Dermot McCulloch, the Oxford professor who wrote a book called The History of Christianity, which I referenced in my video. Says it was one of these Syriac Christians who is one of the ones who brings these numerals into Arabic scholarship. The other interesting point, so in my third video, so my second video of the Influencer series will be on Ibn Rushd and what he did, also known as Averroes in Europe. The third one is Adelard of Bath. And Adelard of Bath is one of these scholars that was drawn to Toledo. And he is credited as one of the scholars who brought Arabic numerals and zero, and he translated Euclid's uh, uh, geometry and brought that back. Abelard of Bath also brought back. He met Al-Khwarizmi, the man who algebra is named for. He translated his astronomical tables. So he's one of those people who brings all of this back, and he is the one, or one of the ones, who brings these Arabic numerals and the zero into European universities. But the Muslims didn't invent it; they got it from the Indians. So
Yeah, and obviously, like you're saying, once they got the concept of zero, that was a game changer,
oh yeah,
regardless. But
yeah,
yeah, that really changed the game. But yeah, I also wanted to hold on. Oops, sorry. Okay, yeah, we did the numericals as well. So, Jason, a couple of comments. I just want to get your thoughts on them, if that's okay.
sure.
Just to kind of steer the conversation on. Let me see the ones that starred. So these were just some comments that were coming up as we've been talking. So Snowy Keep was saying the Renaissance started after the fall of Constantinople, centuries after the Islamic Golden Age, with the Byzantine scholars sharing their knowledge with their Italian counterparts.
Yes and no. So the Renaissance actually starts before the fall of Constantinople, but the fall of excuse me, the fall of Constantinople contributes to the Renaissance. So Constantinople fell in like 1453, somewhere around 1453, if it's not the right date. The Renaissance itself actually starts in the 1300s with the rediscovery of Cicero and the rediscovery of Lucretius on the nature, which is basically Epicurean philosophy. So Lucretius was a Roman who translated Epicurus's Greek into Latin prose. So Cicero gets rediscovered in the 1300s by I can't remember his name. I always get this guy's name wrong. So Cicero gets rediscovered, and then Lucretius gets rediscovered in the 1300s. Then the fall of Constantinople happens in the 1450s. So it adds fuel to the fire. So all of the knowledge that was in the East that had already been rediscovered in Toledo gets added in, right? So all of this ancient Greek knowledge that comes from Toledo, but then it's also in Constantinople. So it's just more of the same. So, but yeah, the fall of Constantinople did start or did contribute to it, but it starts about 100. The Renaissance actually starts about 100 years before the fall of Constantinople, but it does add to it.
Thank you, Jason. Snowy Keep is saying thanks for the correction. There's a couple more comments actually of Snowy Keeps as well. I think as we were talking in general, I think Snowy Keep is saying, I'm curious to see how the Islamic Golden Age really factored in here. I guess that I don't know exactly.
It's just that flood of information that comes from Toledo. So as you know, astronomy, mathematics, architecture, engineering, it just like James Berg, it blows everything apart. Especially Aristotle, because what does Aristotle bring? He brings logic, and logic fundamentally transforms how you look at problems and start dissecting things. As I started kind of going down that road when I went off on the tangent about the Christian Dark Ages and the Muslim Dark Ages. So at the same time, Aristotle is coming back in. The Bishop of Paris and the Pope are trying to silence the teaching of Aristotle, but it doesn't work. So, excuse me, any good Catholic who knows about Thomas Aquinas knows Thomas Aquinas incorporates Aristotle into his Christian theology. So the attempts to try to silence Aristotle failed, but there were multiple attempts. Burke makes mention that something like a third of the students at the University of Paris went on strike when the church tried to ban the teaching of Aristotle. And they tried multiple times to do it. And one of them was Aristotle's De Anima on the soul, which tries to claim that there's, forgive me if I get this wrong, but that there is a one universal consciousness. Well, that violates Christian teaching, right? If there's only one universal soul, if you don't have your own personal soul, then how could we damn you to hell if you don't do what we say? So it's a threat to their authority.
Yeah, no, exactly. I hope Snowy Keep that answered your question as well. But I think what you are trying to say, which we're going to come to in another comment, is will also be addressed. But yeah, no, thank you so much for that, Jason. Bernice was saying, but the Muslims cut off the exchange of knowledge between Byzantium and Europe in the first place by pirating on the Mediterranean. I'm not sure if you would like to comment on that.
Well, as I mentioned earlier, after the fall of Western Europe in 476, they really kind of went in as separate spheres. Like Greek is pretty much forgotten for hundreds of years. And pardon me.
Okay,
Western
okay.
Europe, yeah, it's just an annoying cough. Western Europe, they call it the Dark Ages, but it's really a misnomer. I mean, things are still going on, but secular knowledge, for all intents and purposes, is dead. So what Al-Ghazali did to Islam, Saint Augustine did to Christianity. So Augustine, the Bishop of Hippo in the late 300s, early 400s, who was the most influential Catholic father, basically says, "What's the point? He's living at a time when the Europe is being sacked by the Vandals and the Goths, and they're actually sacking his own city in North Africa, in modern day Tunisia. And so, Christianity, for those of you who don't know, who maybe you're Muslim followers, Christianity is a death cult. Christianity has been waiting for Jesus to come back and smite the evildoers and institute the kingdom of God from the beginning. So Christianity is a death cult. So Augustine sees these vandal, like, says, what do we need to worry about life for? It's pointless. Life is coming to an end. Just forget about secular learning. And he's the one who comes up with the doctrine of original sin. That if a baby is baptized, dies before being baptized, he's going to burn in hell. His own bishops told him he was unworthy of being a Christian for making such an idiotic statement like that. So, and I mentioned his own Greek was really poor, which is why he misunderstood Paul. And so the East and West, so Western Catholic, Latin-speaking, Eastern Greek-speaking Orthodox, they really kind of go their own separate ways. So it wasn't really the Muslims that cut it off. They had kind of like gone that way in their own accord. And part of that was the political rhetoric of the bishops of Rome, saying, "I'm the Roman primacy." So that's one of the causes of the schism between the East and the West. Is all I cover that in my Vatican Lies series, like the myth of Peter and all of this. They get just one lie after another. Ironically, my last name being Sylvester, because there was a Pope Sylvester who was Pope when Constantine converted to Christianity, who did absolutely nothing. So the Christian Church just creates all of these lies about Pope Sylvester that one of my idiot ancestors names the family after. So anyway, that's another story.
That's so interesting.
I wrote
one of my ancestors.
I wrote the Wikipedia article. So there's two. There's the Acts of Sylvester, which is where the notion that Sylvester was baptized, Constantine was baptized by Pope Sylvester, and that he had leprosy, and all this comes from the Acts of Sylvester. And then the other one is the fictitious Council of Sylvester, known as the Constitutum Sylvestri. Both of those Wikipedia's and articles I wrote as part of my research. So if people are interested, they can go check those out. So yeah, and I just thought it was really, really funny that the guy named Sylvester is the one who's writing all of this, because the only recent scholarship on the Council of Sylvester was done in German like 30 years ago. So like there's nothing recent in English. So I did it. So.
Oh wow. You're actually, yeah, oh my gosh, your ancestors would be proud.
Yeah. Well, my great I was talking about, have you watched it's going off on a tangent here. Have you watched Handmaid's Tale? Have you seen the last season?
Not the last season. I'm not there yet.
Okay. My hometown features, they film a lot around where I grew up in Canada. In the funeral, and I won't spoil it for you, but in the funeral scene where the everyone's marching up the road is in my hometown. The camera, and I find this absolutely, I was talking about this today, the camera is in front of the church that my great-great-grandfather was the minister in. And here I am undoing all of his good work. So. But I thought it was hilarious that the camera was in front of the church where he used to be to preach.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
So yeah. So if when you get to the latest series and you see the funeral scene and they're marching up, that's like a 5-minute walk from my parents' house.
Oh wow. Thanks, Jason. I'm gonna look out for that for sure. That's very cool. CP was saying, according to Bill Warner, the Islamic invaders destroyed about 90% of all knowledge in the invaded countries and stole the rest and had it translated into Arabic and called it theirs. Not sure if you'd like to comment on that.
I don't know who Bill Warner is, but obviously there's plunder whenever time anybody comes in. So as we mentioned earlier, like if there are some Muslims who claim that they invented the numerals and the zero, no, they got that from the Indians for sure. Whether I mean, yeah, there's probably some truth to that they probably took what was there when they took over. But as I mentioned, there's 350 years from the time they get paper in Samarkand till the time of Al-Ghazali. So you have 350 years of scholarship going on. So that's not all conquered mystery. They're developing their own stuff. Like they develop algebra and stuff like that. So yeah, so there's probably an element of truth that when they first got there, they probably took what was there, but then they kept on going for 350 years or more. They're developing in all of the STEM areas.
And Jason, just so Bill Warner he has a PhD actually, and he's an expert on political Islam. I remember watching one of his videos on like jihad and the Crusades a while ago when I was what do you guys put it, deconverting from my Muslim phase. But yeah, I was watching obviously the Crusades versus jihad and weighing up which side was worse. But obviously he really like hones in on the political side of Islam. So yeah, do check him out if you're interested in that.
Sure, I will.
Timon, sorry if I mispronounced your name. Timon was saying to Snowy Keep, I'm not sure if the speaker is going to touch on that, the gist of it. And I think this is an interesting point as well. So the gist of it is that nearly all of the so-called greatest Islamic philosophers, scientists, etc., were heretics. Jason, I'm interested to hear your thoughts on this.
I have a quote on that. So, as I mentioned, episode 2 of Influencers.
Yeah, back in 1 second. If you can carry on talking.
Sure. So, my second video will be on Ibn Rushd, better known as Avicenna. Averroes. Ibn Sina is Avicenna. Averroes, Ibn Rushd. He's actually better known in Europe than he is in Islamic cultures because of his influence on the European universities and people like Thomas Aquinas. And there's a great quote from Bertrand Russell in his book, A History of Western Philosophy. And Russell writes about Ibn Rushd, and he says, the Caliph Al-Mansur published an edict to the effect that God has decreed hellfire for those who thought that truth could be found by unaided reason. All the books that could be found on logic and metaphysics were given to the flames. So yeah, so there is definitely truth that, and that's part of where Al-Ghazali's attacks come from. He's like, how dare you question the revealed wisdom of the Quran and try to question? Because Al-Ghazali makes great use of allegorism. That if there's something that we can prove scientifically that contradicts something in the Quran, well, then obviously the Quran must be an allegory. It must be taken metaphorically. And so, of course, people like Al-Ghazali refer to them as heretics. So there is definitely an element of what they could be called a heretic. But that's true throughout Christian history as well. Anybody if you and I disagree, well, then I'm a heretic to you and you're a heretic to me. So yeah, I would say that I would pardon me. I would agree to some extent that the great Islamic philosophers could be seen as heretics. They would say they were devout Muslims who were seeking the truth of Allah by their inquiries into the natural world to try to understand Allah better. But of course, their enemies would call them heretics.
Yeah, for sure. And also the fact that Islam does not encourage thinking beyond a certain scope. And some things it outright says, like it says in the Quran, that matters to do with the ruh or the soul are beyond human comprehension. So just leave that to like your Lord, basically. So it does kind of have that inherent built in, as with any religion or, so to speak, cult or whatever, is don't question the fundamentals and
Yeah, exactly.
stay within the framework and then you'll be safe. And obviously we know throughout the course of history, anybody that went against that did not meet a good fate.
Yeah. Well, the same thing happens in Christianity. Like
Exactly. Like
Origen was one of the most respected Christian church fathers until his views became heretical and all his works were burnt by Justinian like 200-300 years later. So, one day you're a star, the next day, you're the spawn of Satan. So
yeah,
it's all
exactly.
political.
Like you're drinking poison to kill yourself, and a state mandated thing. But yeah, it never ended well. And obviously that's why, Jason, I'm really glad for your contributions as well, because genuinely, like this pursuit of knowledge and pushing for an enlightenment in the Islamic world is like the need of the hour by any stretch of the imagination. So
well, that's why I called my book "Dangerous Ideas," because it's dangerous to the authority of the time, and it basically, as I said, the law of unintended consequences. It's basically pushed religion back into a corner and said, religion is private. It's up to you. Keep it out of the public sphere. Keep it out of public schools. Keep it out of government. So, yeah, but it
exactly.
took a lot of people, like a lot of these people, like Thomas Hobbes, who wrote Leviathan, was accused of being an atheist. There were people in Parliament in England calling for him to be burnt. And
Yeah.
he was not an atheist. He was just saying, because he had come through the English Civil War with the Puritans, and just saying there should be a state religion, and everybody go along and get along, do whatever you want in private, but there's one state religion, and like just everybody like just be happy. And they wanted to kill him for that.
Yeah, exactly. We've got another comment from Timon, who is saying, yeah, it's Greek philosophy. Even the translators were Christian dhimmis. The so-called Arabic numerals is actually Indian in origin. Yeah, we touched on that. I just wanted to focus on the point for a second about the translators being like of this dhimmi class. Jason, are you familiar with dhimmi and that
Yeah.
whole shebang? Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I mentioned. That these Nestorian Christians, the Church of the East, are the ones who did all of the translations. There's a great at the very it's linked in the also linked in the description. It's in the video. There's a book by Richard Rubinstein called Aristotle's Children. He gives wonderful detail on who these translators were: the Christian translators, the Arabic translators, the Jewish Latin translators. So if you can't find it in your local library or your local bookstore, there's a link in the description of my video to the book on archive.org. You can read this book. It's really, really cool. Like I would never, you wouldn't even think that they know the names of these translators. Like you would think that would be kind of a detailed loss to history, but Rubinstein catalogs it in his book. I mentioned earlier Dermot McCulloch's book, A History of Christianity, which is a big, thick book, but it's fascinating. So if you want to like span 2,000 years of Christian history, McCulloch's, he's also got a 6-part BBC series that's really, really fascinating, and he breaks it up into the first church, the Catholics, the Protestants, the Orthodox. So it's a really his title is Professor of the History of the Church at Oxford. So this guy who knows what he's talking about.
Awesome. Thank you, Jason. And again, I think Grey Jedi, hi, Grey Jedi, it's been a while, is saying Camera Obscura was by India, also University of Nalanda told one ruins is approximately 2,000 years old. I need to check that, but yes, the Camera Obscura is attributed to even as early as 400 BC with Motai, the founder of Mohism, is one theory, and also 1,000 years before Islam with the Greeks as well, like Aristotle and stuff with the pinhole camera. But yeah, it definitely preceded Islam. I love this thought. This is just a general thought by Michael. If there's one takeaway from history, it is this: our constant task is to preserve and spread truth and wisdom, and to save them from the ravages of those who seek power. Indeed.
Exactly.
That's so. Yeah. Did you want to comment on that, Jason?
Yeah, that's in my book. In the video, and in the book. So the videos are all based on the book. So in the video, I mentioned there's a book called On the Marriage of Philology and Mercury, written by Martiana Scapella, and Burke talks about it as well in The Day the Universe Changed, episode 2. that he was living in North Africa, same time as St. Augustine, when they see Western Roman Empire crumbling and all of these tribes attacking, and he says we can't save all the books. So what he does is he compiles the seven liberal arts into one book, and ironically, that one book survives. Right, like he tries to save this book of the seven liberal arts so that it's easy to keep one book and preserve it, and it does come down, and that's what Charlemagne uses. So when Charlemagne creates the cathedral schools, it's Capella's seven liberal arts that becomes the core of their curriculum from the 400s. So
yeah, I
so
love
there
that. I
is,
love that tidbit of knowledge in your video as well. That was really interesting. And I think law and something else became one of the most popular degrees, if I'm not mistaken.
yeah. So Bologna, after the rediscovery of the codices, law is like one of the most popular degrees to study for. So
Yeah.
I actually made a comment in my older book of the point about the burning of the Library of Toledo. So it's like the Muslims were busy preserving all of our scholarship, while the Catholics were delightfully burning it all for us. So
Grey Jedi, again, thank you for your comment. The problem Islam had with its golden age is it started to create free thinking and new ideas, new stuff, which, yes, Islam found threatening.
yeah, and that's what Al Ghazali, that was his problem with it. That how dare you challenge? How dare you use reason to challenge the received wisdom? And as I said, Christianity went into a dark age. Islam went into a dark age. Christianity came out of it, and I'm pretty sure Islam is coming out of it. So, with the democratization of information on the internet and the blasphemy laws, Islam's day of reckoning with their own enlightenment is coming, and I I would wager it's going to be within the next century, at the way the spread of knowledge is
Yes,
going.
yes. I think with the power of the might of the internet behind us as well. I'm hoping for a little bit faster than that, Jason. I want to see some
Mm.
faster strides in my lifetime, but no, I completely acknowledge that might not be realistic. But yeah, as long as we're doing our little bit to plant whatever seeds we can. Um,
Well, it's always threatening. As I said, in Christianity, like Hobbes was threatened with being burnt alive. Spinoza, who's writing at the same time. So I have one chapter that compares Hobbes and Spinoza. Spinoza borrows a lot of what Hobbes says in the Leviathan. He's called like the most dangerous man in Europe. His book is a book forged in hell, and you know, and all they're doing is saying we should have the power to think freely without the
yeah,
church telling us what we can and cannot. Like Descartes, like people talk about, it's the regressive left that's silencing academia. Well, like 400 years ago, the church is saying you can't teach, Rene Descartes and Cartesian logic. So
yeah, touche, exactly.
yeah,
I like this comment. Allied Atheist Alliance is saying it's always funny to me that the golden age of Islam wasn't under Muhammad. I know you would think, right, that the best human of all of mankind would be the one who leads this amazing era of absolute like progress and discovery and of human race thriving or civilization, at least the one he's responsible for absolutely thriving. But no,
well,
they're still, yeah, go
the
on.
point the point I make is if Muhammad was so enlightened, and was Gabriel was the parent. I think Gabriel was the one who's whispering in his ear to write the Quran. Why does Islam have a lunar calendar? Shouldn't they have a solar calendar if they're so enlightened?
Yeah, but they would argue that I don't know what are the benefits of a lunar calendar vis-a-vis
Mm.
because it doesn't work out. Yeah. Snowface, sorry, Snowkeep was saying there was something about progress in medicine in Islam with the works of
Avicenna,
Avicenna,
Avicenna. It's Ibn Sina. Yeah.
Ibn Sina. Yeah, I've never said it in this way, Avicenna. I always say it in the
Yeah.
Arabic way, which were
Well,
then
that's what I
uprooted.
mentioned when they burned the Library of Toledo. All they kept were the medical texts. Everything else they burned, but they kept the medical texts.
Yeah, that's really interesting. But then they also obviously because Islam again for religious reasons, everything else was posing a threat to the direct theology and the fundamentals of Islam. But the medicine is what they really kind of wanted to safeguard.
Yeah.
even if it was made co-created by infidels, according to them.
Yeah.
Progress is progress. Um, Wahid is saying, what, did non-Muslims prefer to live under Roman or other empires during the Golden Age? Were they oppressed?
Uh, Burke makes a very good point that there was a lot of camaraderie going on in Muslim Spain. That more often than not, your mother-in-law might be Muslim, or your father, your father might be a Muslim. That King Alfonso, who took over Toledo, had spent part of his earlier life in Toledo. So this is and a lot of European nobility would come down to Spain, for like a hot bath, which is good for everybody. Like
Yeah.
Burke being British, he's got a lot of British humor. There's a lot of really kind of subtle humor lines in his writing. So it's good for everyone to have a hot bath, or they come down to have their teeth fixed. So there was probably a lot less tense rivalry going on than propaganda makes it out to be. But as I said, the Nestorians left. A lot of the scholars left the Roman Empire and went to Persia, where they had more freedom than being under Roman imperial Christianity. So there's probably some two-way going on there. I mean, so there might have been some that preferred to live there, but so
And Jason, what would you say in regards to like the any form of Renaissance under the Ottoman Empire, Islamically speaking?
you mean was there one? Or
Yeah, so like in terms of like, how obviously it varied from sultan to sultan, and we see that in, the same thing happen in Islamic rule in India, where you can suddenly get a very, very kind of progressive environment where the actual courts are places of discourse. They invite people from all around the world. Knowledge is collated, not burnt. They're also writing. One of the Mughal sultans made his own religion, Deen Ilahi. So that they kind of allow that scope to flourish. Would you say that happened? There was more merit than destruction done under the Ottoman Empire, and that in terms of
I
progress.
I I can't speak to that. I haven't studied the Ottomans in detail. I mean, I know like very little about
Okay.
the Ottomans, but I couldn't really speak to that with any sort of authority. So
Hmm. Okay. Thanks. Snowy keeps saying the study of anatomy was forbidden in the Islamic countries, if I recall correctly. Um, I, I don't know, Jason, if you have any thoughts on that.
I I know medicine was important to them, whether they were actually cutting into bodies, and that actually might tie into a thought I was having this afternoon. So a lot of Western medicine comes from Galen, the ancient Greek Galen, but Galen's anatomy was horrible. I mean, it was like completely wrong in many cases, and it held sway for a really really long time. I can't remember when it started to change, but it was like well into like maybe 1600s before the Christians in the West started dissecting bodies and actually looking. It might be in one of James Burke's other episodes where he talks about it. Maybe that's where I saw it, but I can't recall exactly. But yeah, I would think it might be in the day the universe changed in one of the other episodes. And that thought actually occurred to me today that if the medical texts were the ones that were preserved, then should that not have impacted what Galen was teaching, but obviously didn't. So maybe the fact that maybe Snowy's right. Maybe they were forbidden from actually cutting into a body and doing detailed anatomical designs. So maybe they were also looking at Galen and just accepting it. So that it's that's possible. I can't speak to that. I've never looked into it any deeper, but it certainly kind of squares that circle of why Galen held sway for so much longer into Europe after the rediscovery of the medical texts from this golden age. So it could possibly be very likely that the anatomy was forbidden, and that's why Galen held on as long as he did.
Hmm. Sorry, Grey Jedi makes a funny point. Well, if they had done anatomy properly, they would have discovered semen does not come from the backbone, as the Quran indicates. Yeah, it's true, and I would imagine that, according to various schools of Islamic thought, it might have differed at the time. But yeah, I can imagine why a lot of Islamic schools of thought would say that, you're messing with, you're going beyond the constraints of God now, because there's a strict procedure around burial, the treatment of dead bodies, the way they should be washed and treated. And again, like I said, the soul is so mystical in the Islamic context that you just kind of you're not really encouraged to, like, even in this day and age, some Muslims quiver at the thought of like postmortems and stuff. But yeah, also just in a modern context, growing up in the Middle East, I grew up between Saudi Arabia and Dubai, and we were not taught evolution. Those pages of the textbook were actually glued together. So you just just skip over it. And the same thing with like anatomy and some biological chapters that talk about like the reproductive system and stuff. Because we were doing the British curriculum, sorry, they had to, because we were sitting the exams that they sit in the UK, we had to know some level of it. But all the other schools, again, they don't even teach you about the reproductive system, and all of these things are just considered completely in opposition to Islam. So even today within the education system, if you're not completely in an international school, you will come out of an entire system not knowing what evolution is, or really how reproduction works, or even literally seeing two naked bodies in a scientific manner in a textbook. So
But you
yeah.
see this, you see the same thing in the United States with these evangelical Christians that don't want evolution taught in
Oh
high schools. And I remember this distinctly. Back, it was late '90s, early 2000, and the I believe it was the editor for Scientific American had written an introduction and said, to all the parents who don't want your child to teach evolution, thank you very much. Your child will be denied entry for lacking the basic requirements for university entrance.
wow. Yep, exactly. And in a country like America, Jason, it's just sad to know that that's still happening in this day and
Well,
age. And I
it's
mean, even here
they're
across the
declining.
pond.
Their demographics are going down, so they're losing
Okay,
quickly.
okay, good. That's good to know. Um, okay, we've got a few more, Jason. I don't know if you wanted to read this question and touch on it. Otherwise, we can move on.
Ask about the apocalypse. Okay, there's we talked about this on our last episode. The Cambridge History of Islam is an amazing resource. So
Mhm.
it's, I believe it was on on archive.org. It probably still is. Volume 1 talks about the origins of Islam, and there is an article in there that talks about the apocalyptic origins of Islam. That um, you know the history of Judaism, of Christianity, of Islam, it's all very apocalyptic. The Jews at the time of Jesus was an apocalyptic end times preacher. And that's what Christianity, like I said, Christianity is a death cult. They've been waiting for that. And then the Islamic scholars are saying that, this same period of time in Arabia, there were a lot of apocalyptic expectations. And you look at Islam, and it's very heavily influenced by Judeo Christianity. You and I both, I noticed we both, I know I shared it, but you commented on it, that meme of the guy like pushing the fountain, like Zoroastrianism, Arab paganism, Christianity, Judaism, and you get your mix of Islam, and that's exactly right. That's just dead on accurate. That it's highly uh, a, a syncretism of Judeo Christianity, of Zoroastrianism, and of Arab paganism. So yeah, there are scholars who do believe that there was an element of apocalypticism in early Islam. So yeah, I would recommend people who are interested, go to archive.org, look for volume 1 of the Cambridge History of Islam. It's really, 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 really interesting. So
Thank you for that, Jason. So I guess where I want to kind of come to before I guess we get towards the end of this conversation is I'm trying to be as unbiased here as possible. Like I want to go, where the facts are, where the evidence is, what the history's saying, and not just the Islamic history, but not the history that's written by the victors in that sense. So going by all their claims, like I said, we could sit here all day and go through the Islamic claims under the Golden Age. But from what I kind of got from listening to you and watching your video, and hearing your thoughts, is that the Islamic Golden Age, obviously, even though it was maybe bought out of or on the back of certain conquests or just things that aren't very pretty, but then within the scope of taking what they could get from various cultures, and like how the literature of the Greeks had come back to them, and then they started collating this information, and then winning the battle against the Chinese, harnessing the production of paper, being able to use that and send that across their empire all the way to like Spain and beyond, was because then when they got the fundamentals, they've got the concept of zero, they've got whatever they needed from the Greeks, the Hindus, whichever other cultures they were coming into contact with. But then that tiny little bubble of those kind of few hundred years where scholars were given a certain amount of space, I guess, to use those little pockets of information and then flourish in certain I guess spheres of life, such as astronomy, and I guess even some levels of medicine and whatever. What else, Jason?
Yeah, like
Algebra,
you have that
mathematics.
you have the House of Wisdom in Baghdad,
Yeah,
under the patronage of the Abbasid caliphs. You have all of these, Cordoba, Toledo, um, uh, Toledo, and Granada. You've got these three huge centers of learning. Like I said, Cordoba, like as Burke said, there were 70 libraries in Cordoba, and one library alone had 440,000 books.
yeah,
So it's just astonishing the level. He makes, it says we were living in Europe. We were living in filth. We're apparently he doesn't give the citation, but he says, the Europeans were on the social level of the Sudan, is how Burke describes it. And
mm,
you come to Andalusia, and there's paved roads, and there's gardens, and there's water fountains, and table manners, and four-course meals and desserts, and it's I'm reminded of that line from the movie My Big Fat Greek Wedding. He says,
mm,
my people were writing philosophy when yours were still swinging in the trees, and to some extent that applies to the Muslim world and Europe. And Burke makes the point that their intellectual knowledge was essentially zero in Europe, and like this Muslim scholarship just changed the world forever. That when Toledo changed hands and all of the scholarship came into Europe, like you said, it blew everything apart, because they were basically starting from nothing. Like Burke makes the point that there weren't even words in Latin to describe certain things, which is why the Arabic word gets used, like azimuth. Like he actually uses that term in the video, like the azimuth of an arc. Well,
mm.
azimuth is an Arabic word because there was no corresponding word in Latin to describe what these Arabic mathematicians um, had documented. So
Mm. Yeah, no, that makes sense. I think I'm just obviously trying to say how much of that can be separated from how much you're going to be in a position of power and the acquisition of knowledge and stuff that comes with absolute military might and having all of these lands and empires under your control. So it's just obviously that's the perfect conditions for you to start then dabbling into these things and progressing society and civilization further.
yeah.
But yeah,
Oh,
it's
like
just
lots of history is accidents of history. Like they just happened to defeat the Tangs and discover paper. The king in Toledo just happens to step aside.
mm,
The same thing with the Catholic Church. The Western Empire just happens to fall apart, and the only organization left standing is the Catholic Church. Well, if none of that had happened, like the Catholic Church never would have rose to the dominance. Like the Eastern Orthodox Church remained under the Eastern Emperor until the until the Ottoman conquests. So like history is a series of accidents, and of course the Catholics say it's obviously divine providence that all of these things happened so that Rome could be rise to primacy, and but it's just accidents of history, and that's why I think history is so fascinating, and why I love these connections so much, because A leads to B, leads to C, leads to D. It just nothing happens in a vacuum. It's all interconnected, and that's what I find fascinating, is all of these interesting little. And this is my homage to James Burke and his in the series that he did, because it was a series that I watched like 30 years ago, and I've never forgotten it. Like that's how powerful this series was for me. So
Oh,
if you've never,
wow.
if people have never seen it, go watch The Day the Universe Changed. Watch Connections. I mean, it's more science based. Like he's talking about scientific revolutions, but I'm using the same format. So,
I'm
excuse me.
definitely going to check that out, Jason. I think you sorted out my evening, so thank you for that.
Actually, that's one of the points I wanted to make. Is so Roger Bacon, the English philosopher that everyone associates with creating the scientific method, which isn't really true, is he was kind of foundational in study of optics, and Roger Bacon held the Arabs, especially Ibn Sina, in high regard, and yet he's criticizing Albert the Great, the German theologian, who taught Thomas Aquinas, for making the same mistakes about the Neoplatonism that was in Aristotle that Al Ghazali challenged. But Bacon, Bacon advanced the theory of optics on the backs of Arab scholarship that came out of the Islamic Golden Age.
Yeah. Yeah,
And
no,
then he actually got optics. So we had in the seven liberal arts, he actually got optics added to the curriculum. So because
oh,
optics is important to Christians, why? Because in Genesis, God floods the earth and he sends the rainbow as a sign that his promise that he will never destroy the earth again. So what do these Arabs and these Christian scholars do? They figure out how the rainbow works, and like how it's just like light reflecting off water droplets. So
Jason, this is really random. I don't know if you have any thoughts on this, but I just wanted to know because somebody keeps posting this question in the live chat. So, is this even plausible, or is it a complete fabrication? Here. Oh, sorry. Uh, here. Um, Asked Jason about the Buddhist advisors and governors in Baghdad during the Abbasid dynasty who were an important ruling class. Is that I've not heard of that before.
it's
Is that
possible.
plausible?
It's been over. Excuse me. Um, it's been 30 years for me since I studied Islamic history at university. Well, I didn't study Islamic history; it was one of my electives, but that was 30 years ago. Um, I am actually going. I'm for the first time in 12 years. I'm going home to visit my family next week.
Right.
I'm pretty sure I still have my Islamic textbook sitting on my shelf, so I'll get out and see if I can find some. I did mention Frankopan mentions in the Silk Road that the universities came from um, the Buddhist tradition, but again, this Islamic scholar in the U.S. that's news to him. Uh, it's entirely possible that there were Buddhist advisors. There were Jewish advisors to the caliphs. That's so I talked about it in the second video. So Averroes, Ibn Rushd, lives in Cordoba. He was highly influential on Maimonides, who was a Jewish scholar, also born in Cordoba, about a decade after Ibn Rushd. And he basically, I wouldn't say plagiarized, but he takes a huge page from Ibn Rushd. But I mentioned earlier when you had to step away, Ibn Rushd is mentioning in the Decisive Treatise that if something in the Quran contradicts, it must be allegorical. It must be taken metaphorically, and that's exactly the line that Maimonides takes in his Guide for the Perplexed for Judaism. So I mean, you have Jewish viziers in the Islamic courts. It's certainly possible that there are Buddhists. I don't know specifically about that, but it's interesting. When I get to my parents' place in a couple of weeks, I'll try to remember to dig out my Islamic history textbook. Maybe I'll bring it back with me because it's like a textbook that's like that thick.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
so maybe I can dig through it, and maybe I can even find some of these references to the universities. So.
Yeah, thank you for your question, Kranti, and I hope you're happy that it was answered. Sorry for missing it to begin with.
Was it
Bernice,
John? Was it John that asked that, or?
John asked it because I missed Kranti's comment, and John is a
Okay.
top-notch mod here,
Okay.
so
And
thank you,
thank you,
John.
John. I saw John subscribe to my channel, so thank you, John.
Oh, thank you, John. Yes, amazing. Guys, please go subscribe. Obviously, you are right in time for the release of the series, so you can watch the videos as soon as they come out. Just hit the notification button. But yeah,
If you hate Jordan Peterson, he's next. He'll be the video this week, deconstructing his biblical series and the nonsense that he spews. So that's coming out this weekend.
oh my God, Jason, I tip my metaphorical hat off to you. Thank you for doing what Christians would say is the Lord's work. Bernice is saying, interesting theory. Islam only works as long as there are large dhimmi population. For anybody that doesn't know what dhimmi is, it's basically like in the hierarchy of a Muslim society, you're a non-believer because you're not Muslim, so therefore you're eligible to pay tax, and you can practice your so-called religion as long as you are good and don't cause mischief in the Muslim land, don't blaspheme, and pay your taxes on time. That's essentially what a dhimmi is. But yeah, Bernice is saying when the majority is Muslim, you need to conquer more areas. I would obviously agree, Bernice, because I do see Islam as a political ideology first and foremost. Like I always say, it's got a very expansionist agenda. Some would argue it's just an Arab imperialistic ideology that's kind of gotten out of hand.
I can add to that. So once again in the Cambridge History of Islam, there is a chapter that talks about there's a name for it. I'd have to look it up. But the booty, the spoils of war, are divided up. So the early Muslim conquests were incentivized that hey, you go out, you go conquer these people, and you get a share of the booty. So there was financial incentives. Money talks. So, but and there's actually a term for what that was, but I would have to go look it up to remember what it is.
Yeah, and Dean, hi, it's nice to see you here. Dean is saying, what went wrong? Let me guess, Islam. I think that was on a previous point, but it did make me think that, even when we're sat here and we're kind of discussing whether it was the European Dark Ages or the Dark Ages across the Christian world or the Islamic Golden Age, so to speak, like whenever you've got religion being the kind of focal point of and the limit to human knowledge and progression and I guess just the contribution to civilization, it's always going to hit a dead end, and you get to a point where that it's inevitable that you will regress as a society. And that's why I love that phrase that you mentioned in your video, Jason, when you say the law of unintended consequences. I think that's one of the most beautiful stories in history, where setting up schools connected to every church or cathedral or whatever, and led itself to the modern universities that we have today, which are beacons of free thought and, as you're saying, little things like free speech and intellectual curiosity and everything that we stand for today. So yeah, Dean, Islam went wrong, Christianity went wrong. Ultimately, every religion will go wrong. So to be honest, it's surprising that even when I think about it, is that even such a totalitarian religion like Islam, for it to have flourished at a certain point in history, and you can argue how heretical those people were on a scale of your own personal interpretation of Islam, but that to me is like almost the exception to the rule rather than the rule itself. Is with most religions that would be the case. So that's what I'm saying. Credit where credit's due, where they pushed the fields of algebra and certain other fields like that. But some of these grandiose claims that Muslims make and these Dawa guys make when they've got, all of these inventions under the Islamic Golden Age. No, a simple fact check, a simple ChatGPT, Google answer would tell you that is not the case. So please go and fact check that stuff. I will try and find time to debunk each one of those claims, but it's really long. But I thought Jason here, with like a very kind of informative, educational, unbiased, truly unbiased take on it, would be beneficial to put into the YouTube sphere as well.
Yeah,
But
well,
yeah,
a couple of people on my YouTube channel have called me biased. Like some guy called me propaganda. Like my first video, Vatican Lies, the Myth of Peter. It's like, oh, because nobody had commented, and he's like, nobody comments on your obvious propaganda. I'm like, you mean like facts? And then some guy last week, it just blew my mind. So I quote at least at least 5 or 6 different scholars in the first video is only like 7 minutes long. Like my idea with these videos is to keep them short. Some of them are longer than others. Like Vatican number 3 is like 21 minutes long because there's just so much to deconstruct. But I try to keep them short. And in a span of 7 minutes, of which like 2 minutes is devoted to a clip of Dermot McCulloch's BBC series. And this guy comes on and goes, "Oh, you're just quoting some random people off the internet." I'm like, these are Oxford scholars, Harvard scholars, Bart Ehrman. These are not random people. He goes, "Well, I prefer to stick with with what Wikipedia says about Peter." And I'm like, yeah, okay. If you think 6 noted, highly respected New Testament scholars are random people on the internet, then this conversation is futile.
yeah. And please, if you are watching Jason's videos and you have thoughts or any kind of feedback, please comment. It does wonders for the algorithm. So like, share, subscribe, comment, just push that algorithm. And I think, Jason, you also have a Patreon, right?
I started it, yeah. I mean, it's no one's there yet because I'm just getting started. So I created 6 months of content before I started releasing, because I wanted to have a buffer, so I'm not like scrambling to get something out every week. And 2, as I said, I'm still working on Sins of the Fathers, and I'm up to 1933, and the Nazis and the Reich Concordat between Nazi Germany and the Vatican. And so I want time to go from like 1933 up to like up to today. I want time to write that while I'm pushing out these videos like one a week to try to start building a following of people. I was like, and all of the information that's in the videos is all in the book, but in much more detail. It's all footnoted. Like, as I said, like chapter 2 on the Vatican, Sins of the Fathers, it's got like 500 footnotes. Like, I mean, it's a book all by itself. It's thoroughly footnoted because I want people to go look it up for themselves. Like, don't believe me. Like I'm saying, Jason says, okay, here's the source, here's the page number, go read it for yourself. And then like plus some of the footnotes are explanatory, where there's crossover, like where it says, Ibn Rushd says this, and Maimonides says this, and Spinoza says this, and like I line them up like so you can see them compared in the footnote. So and there's a little, sometimes there's analysis and more in-depth engagement that it doesn't really fit in the flow of the text, so I stick it in the footnote. So,
oh wow.
Religion has nothing to do with science, but yes, but religion is entirely political. So, if you go to my page, if you go to my YouTube page, or my Twitter page, or my Facebook page, my profile photo is actually a continuum. It's like a Venn diagram: social, political, religious, and then history's in the middle, because it is this continuum. Social issues push political mandates. Political mandates get in the past, not so much today. Political mandates get encoded in the religion and then pushed onto society. So it's a continuum. It's a Venn diagram. It's it's all political, and history happens in the middle.
But also the fact that religion is diametrically opposed to science, right? So to have those two things work in tandem together is kind of very rarely, I think, a recipe for a
Well,
society.
that was the very point that Spinoza and many other people made. Spinoza's point was he wrote the book, and I read the book for the title alone. Like, okay, so my book is theoretically is going to be 10. The architecture of the book is 10 chapters. Each chapter is an era. I wrote chapter 5, Hobbes and Spinoza, first, because Spinoza's book, and the title is The Theological Political Treatise. So it's obviously the interrelation between theology and politics. And because it was so influential on everything that came after. So I wrote that chapter first. And Spinoza's whole argument is about we should be free to think without the church telling us what we can do. And what happens as soon as the book comes out, the church in Holland banned it. So
Yeah,
so
exactly.
it is
John,
diametrically
John is
opposed to
also a fan
reason.
of. Yeah. Thanks,
So
Jason.
so John will love then. So I think it might be like episodes 10 and 11 or 11 and 12 is on Spinoza. There's so much content on Spinoza. I actually have two parts because there's so much to deconstruct with Spinoza. So but you'll have to wait a few months because as I said, I've got four different series: Vatican Lies, Pope Snowflake, which is on the papal meltdowns in the 1900s. So when modern society, secular, like you've had the American Revolution, the French Revolution, you've got all of these countries becoming secular, and the papal states and the popes are having a complete fucking meltdown. Pardon my French, having a meltdown, and they're issuing encyclical after encyclical after encyclical, just ranting against the modern liberalism. So Pope Snowflake is series two. Influencers is series three. Jordan Peterson is series four. And so every week I release one of each. So instead of just dumping one after another of the same series, I'm cycling. So Vatican, Pope Snowflake, Influencers, Jordan, Vatican, Pope. So you'll have to wait a while till we get to maybe 5-6 months before we get to
I know
Spinoza.
you're
So.
properly teasing us there, Jason. Like it's like when your favorite show comes out and you're like, what, waiting for the next season to drop, and it's like, oh, we're filming for another 2 years, and it's like, no, my life depends on this.
Yeah. Well, people can read. I mean, I do actually I have on my Medium page. So my Medium page is linked on my YouTube. It should be on my Twitter as well, or even in the description of the videos. I have a link to my Medium page. On my Medium page, I have a very detailed breakout of one section on Spinoza. So my very first video, if you watch my video, a short history of on the road to or a short history of the road to secularism.
Yes.
I do like the links between I'm reading Spinoza and I'm like, okay, I'm like 5 minutes into Spinoza. I'm going, this is really, really Buddhist. I mean, really, really, really Buddhist. And so on my Medium page, I have it says like it's a 20-minute read, like an in-depth breakout of the Eastern philosophy that's just manifestly evident in Spinoza's thinking. So for people who love Spinoza, you can find that on um, on my Medium. I also do a little bit on Hobbes. I talk about Hobbes is obviously borrowing from classical antiquity, like his famous line, "Life is nasty, brutal, and short." Well, that's like ripped right from Sextus Empiricus, who was a disciple of Pyrrho, who was the guy who became a Buddhist with Alexander. So, and Sextus Empiricus found, or he's one of the skeptics who is inspired, like Epicurus, who goes on. So Epicurus is the guy that Lucretius copied. Lucretius is on the nature of things, gets rediscovered in the Renaissance, who inspires Machiavelli, who inspires Spinoza. So ding ding connections.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I love that your work is based around obviously like connecting those dots and stuff, because like I mentioned at the beginning of this stream, history really is just a tapestry, and like so many of these events are interconnected. And once you understand it, just the way that things transpose onto others, and like you're saying, like the political elements of certain religions and sects being born out of that, and then sectarian violence, and even up until the modern day, you see kind of how these currents have led to the position we are in, that we're in today, essentially. But we've got Infidel in the house as well, and he's also a huge Spinoza fan. He's saying today he wouldn't come close to using the word God. He just meant nature.
Yeah. And if you look at his, I actually mentioned that both in the book and in the video that comes out on Spinoza. If you substitute in his ontological proof, if you just swap the word nature for God, then it all makes sense.
Exactly that. That's what you've got to do.
Yeah, but and the thing is, one of my friends, but the friend who turned me on to the Jordan Peterson biblical series, is a philosophy professor. He got really pissed off at me. Excuse me. He got really pissed off at me for saying, Spinoza's theological political treatise wasn't really all that much of original thinking. He's like, oh, how dare you? You're like just some Joe Schmo history buff. You don't have a philosophy PhD like me. How dare you say that? I'm like, it's true. Like, if you actually read what I wrote on my chapter on Spinoza, he's just echoing stuff that people had said before him. He's just putting it all in one place. He's putting his own spin on it. The thing that was unique about Spinoza is he was an excommunicated Jew, and so his his textual criticism of the Hebrew Bible was light years beyond anything any Christian could do, because he was Jewish and he understood Jewish history. He understood the Jewish language. He could deconstruct the Hebrew Bible way better than any Christian could. So that puts him light years. But like all of the ideas, like he's postulating, are coming. He's echoing things of his teachers. He's echoing things of other people. What was the one I was thinking of? I'm having a brain fart.
That's all right.
He said something like, it's gone. It'll come back to me. But like it's like something he wrote or said was very, very obviously and coming from other people. And most Spinoza scholars know this. Like they look at the books that were in his library. Like I've asked, and no one's gotten back to me. I've asked Spinoza professors, like, is there a list somewhere of all of the books that were found in Spinoza's library? Because they do reference, like, he was inspired by this person. Oh, like Ibn Rushd. Like there was a commentary on Ibn Rushd in his library, which is why he's commenting on Ibn Rushd and Maimonides. So
That's interesting.
yeah,
I would love to. Yeah, I had no idea that he commented on Ibn Rushd. To be honest, I would like to get my hands on that as well.
It basically called Maimonides an idiot. So. And Maimonides is echoing Ibn Rushd for this commentary on allegory. It's like, why don't you just call it what it is? It's just fucking stupid. Like, why? Oh, you have to pretend it's an allegory.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Okay, I definitely need to read that. Maybe I'll read that live. Maybe we can do that one day, Jason. Read that live.
Shoulders of Giants. Exactly. He's not doing any of this in a vacuum. He's literally building. Like even the last 4 chapters, I think, of the theological political treatise are almost a direct parallel of Hobbes's Leviathan, and that's where my chapter on Hobbes and Spinoza, I actually do like side by side comparisons, like where they're making the same arguments, or where they're making similar arguments, but maybe they're making different points. So.
Mm-hmm. And I think here, Infidel was referring back to interchanging God for nature when he says shoulders of giants, and then just like Einstein. And then, so Infidel is actually an ex-Jew. But where was it? Yes, John. John is, I'm so sorry, I'm going to butcher this name. Adrian,
yeah, that's Spinoza.
Yep, had a similar philosophy, but he wrote.
Okay, so Corba was imprisoned by the Dutch authorities for writing a book that basically made fun of religion, and died in prison. And so when Spinoza published the Theological Political Treatise, he published anonymously with a fake publisher and a fake city. And they theorize he did it because Adrian was his friend, and he knew what happened to his friend, and so that's why he published it anonymously. And then he wrote the Theological Political Treatise as a prelude for his book Ethics, which he then never published because of the what's the word? The vicious reaction to the TTP. That Ethics wasn't even published till after he died. So.
And sorry, who was it? Yeah, okay. John, sorry, Jason, you've got a new fan. John Stockman says, I will watch your videos. And I'm guessing that's a sub right there, but I need people to please go and sub to Jason's video so that when he's finished the series, we can have him back on and we can dissect the whole series. And this was like literally based on Influencers 1. So you can imagine like the plethora of knowledge that he's about to bring. Yeah?
Let me look here on my playlist. So according to there's a channel called vidIQ that it's helpful for people with YouTube content, and they said subscribers isn't enough. The YouTube algorithm, if people just subscribe but don't watch your videos, it doesn't count. You want engaged people that are actually going to watch the videos and watch them all the way through, like not like just 1 or 2 minutes. So okay, so influencers, I have 19 videos in my playlist. So let me read off the list. Hang on. Where is it?
And guys and gals, please like this stream. As John was saying, let's push it past 100. I'm not sure what it's standing at right now because
it was 70 or so before.
Oh,
there we go. Okay. Videos. Okay, so let me scroll down. Okay, so yeah, so Influencers 1 was the contextual introduction to Charlemagne and the Islamic Golden Age. 2 is Ibn Rushd. 3 is Adelard of Bath. 4 is Peter Abelard, who was he's a really fascinating figure. It's you got to watch Peter Abelard. 5 is Roger Bacon. 6 is Sigar of Brabant, who is one of the people that Burke talks about in his series, The Day the Universe Changed. He was hugely popular professor of Aristotle, and they called him the most dangerous man in Europe, I think. 7 is William of Ockham, Occam's razor, who goes way, way, way beyond the razor. Like this guy like got excommunicated for like basically telling the Pope to go kiss his ass. 8 is Giordano Bruno and what was going on with Bruno. 9 is Galileo. 10 and 11 are Spinoza. And then 12, the 12th one is Jose Rizal. So if there's any Filipinos watching, the Philippine Revolution and what Jose Rizal and the Philippine Revolution very much like happened in Europe with the monks. Like in Europe with the dissolution of the monasteries, it happened all over Europe. It wasn't just in England under Henry VIII. But the monks in the Philippines were widely despised for their friar estates. So the execution of Jose Rizal was instrumental in the Philippine Revolution, and actually, for a few years, actually resulted in the Catholic Church was actually not disbanded is the wrong word, but it was no longer the state religion of the Philippines for a few years after the Philippine Revolution. So I do a little bit on Jose Rizal. It's also a tribute to a friend of mine who's now deceased. His name is Carlos Celdran. I met Carlos at a conference a few years ago. Carlos was the first person to be charged under the Philippine blasphemy laws, and then ended up dying of a heart attack a couple of years ago, living in exile in Spain. For basically protesting using a character from Rizal's book, who was like the prototypical antagonist of the Catholic Church, and basically just held up the name of the priest from the book and got charged with blasphemy in the Philippines for that. So I talk about Jose Rizal in my Influencer series. So if most people probably aren't too familiar with what goes on in the Philippines, but it's an homage to my dearly departed friend, and because it was so important for what happened in the Philippines, even though the Philippines is still heavily Catholic. The Philippine Revolution and Rizal was sparked almost entirely by hatred for the Catholic Church.
That's horrible, Jason. And yeah, no, I'm really, really looking forward to the rest of your work. Infidel, you've got him with that list and everything you just said. I'm in. We've also got a couple more Grey Jedi sub to you as well. So yeah, let's get Jason's work out there, please, guys. Jason, we've got a question for you.
Mr. Sylvester, is my dad here? Four on the floor. Yeah, in my video, in my YouTube channel, I have a clip. There's a Canadian comedy troupe from the 80s called The Frantics, and they had a CBC comedy series called Four on the Floor. Did they influence with views on religion? No, but um, they have two. Go look these up, people. They have two hilariously funny religion clips. It's all audio. There's no video, but they're on YouTube. One is called "Worshippers Are Us," like "Our Worshippers Are Us," the first church of all denominations, and the other one is called "Heaven is for Presbyterians." Um, it's really, really, really funny. It's like just hysterically funny. So they didn't influence my views on religion, but I do know of them. But on my YouTube channel is a clip from their series Four on the Floor, where there's a retiring Anglican priest, and he says, "Oh, I'm retiring. I can have sex now." And the incoming priest says, "We're Anglican. We can always have sex." He's like, "What?"
Oh my
um,
gosh.
but I did just I want to say Rick. It's been about 30 years, but I used to live in Port Credit, Ontario, and I was in the local fresh fruit and vegetable market, and I think it was Rick from the Frantics was in there with me, and I went, "Aren't you Rick from the Frantics?" And he goes, "Yeah." I said, "I've been looking for your album. I can't, like, it's no longer in stores." He goes, "I live around the corner. Come with me. I'll give you a copy." I'm like, "Oh, are you kidding me?" So I've met Rick from the Frantics. I've been to his house.
Oh wow, that's amazing. Something that I'm definitely more aware of. Dale is saying I'm from Philly, so Rocky is one of my favorite philosophers. Yep, I love that. It ain't about how hard you hit, it's about how hard you get hit and keep moving forward. I think that's what he says
Yeah.
to his son in one of the videos. But yeah, Dale, I'm
Well,
with you.
that's what a lot of these philosophers did. Like a lot of these guys, like Hobbes and Spinoza, these guys got into a lot of hot water, but
Mhm.
they influenced the next generation who picked up their ideas and picked up the ball, and they kept advancing, you know, towards the goal line. So that's what I'm sort of documenting, that evolutionary history of how these dangerous ideas moved us to a secular society. Because I see people like Bruno were burned at the stake, So
Yeah, exactly. Sorry, Jason, I don't know why I'm having some issues with my camera at the moment. It's just kind of frozen on me. But yeah, I just wanted to, I guess we can wrap up so it's under 2 hours, and I know it's really, really late for you, but
yeah, it's
or
fine. I'm
early.
still I'm still wide awake.
But yeah, just kind of your thoughts on a little bit on your writings about dangerous ideas and secularism and the way that humanity has kind of throughout history now gotten to a point where we're as secular as we've ever been, and what you've kind of come to find in your research, I guess, to writing, and your views on that as we wrap up.
Yeah, that it was really dangerous for a lot of these people to say what they did, which is why a lot of people wrote anonymously. Spinoza wrote anonymously even before Spinoza. Um, I want to say it was the French priest Jean Meslier, if I'm pronouncing it right, was a Catholic priest who basically wrote a book just ripping the Catholic Church and Christianity apart, but wasn't published till after his death. And, oh, yeah, that's one of the things I was going to say earlier about Spinoza that I couldn't remember. Like Spinoza's like directly echoing things that Dante wrote about. Dante wrote a book called De Monarchia about like freedom of thought. Sigurd of Brabant and William of Ockham. These people are all advocating freedom of thought. So that's the one I was trying to think of before, that Dante and some of these people are making the same claims that Spinoza made like hundreds of years before he did. So, but yes, some of these people like Bruno paid the ultimate price. Being burnt alive. Like, can you imagine a more horrific death than being burnt alive? And it wasn't just him. Like Jan Hus, Jerome of Prague were both burnt at the stake. So Jerome of Prague was actually quite prescient. He is recorded as saying, like, within 100 years, there's going to be a reckoning, and within 100 years of him being burnt at the stake was Martin Luther and the Reformation. So it was quite interesting. So yeah, so one of the things I look at in the book is not only what did these people say, what was so controversial, what was the reaction, what was the law at the time, what happened to them, but then how did they then influence like somebody else. Like Spinoza was hugely influential on the Enlightenment and especially on the French encyclopedists like Didier and Holbach.
Yeah.
So
Oh, sorry, I just fixed my camera now.
yeah,
Jason, thank you so much for handling that. And yeah, I think in terms of like the Islamic Golden Age and the contribution it's had to wider society, and in your understanding of, the I guess going from a position of dangerous ideas to where we are today, where do you think the Islamic Golden Age fits in, and how much do you think it's lent itself to where we are
oh,
at today?
it's completely brought Western Europe out of its. I don't like using the term Dark Ages, but let's call it the Middle Ages is probably the more historically accurate term. As Burke says in his episode, like our foundation was basically zero. So all of this information just transformed everything overnight. So had that influx of information and knowledge from the Islamic world not been there or had not been translated, who's to say? I mean, it Western Europe might be the third world, right? Like the countries that never developed and stayed sort of rooted in ignorance. So
And would you say,
I
Jason,
mean, it
that's
was completely transformational. So
would you say that's uniquely Islamic, that knowledge that came about, or
no, because obviously it was a compilation. It was the copying and retention of Greek philosophy, uh, other cultures like the Indian numerals and zeros, their own scholarship that they then added to it, their astronomy, the algebra. So they add to it, but they're also bringing in the Greek philosophy as well and the Indian numerals. So
hmm,
it's not uniquely Arab, but it was the Arabs, it was the Library of Toledo, and that accident of history of the the Christian king taking over the city of Toledo and having access to all of that repository of knowledge that changed the world forever.
yeah,
And
great word.
that's why I love that quote from Burke. This is just blew everything apart. It just
Yeah. Just
he makes a good point about how like we're sort of doing the same thing today. Like technology today is expanding so rapidly. Like like we're bringing cellular technology to third world countries. So like we're doing it even faster today than happened back then. So
mm. Oh yeah, that's for sure. Just to on your point on the not dark ages, if you wanted to stay away from that term, but Dominus was using that term, saying dark ages are the early Middle Ages when Abrahamic cultism had the most power over society. So, Jason, do you also think that it's just it's very much intertwined with like who's the most dominant force at the time, who yields all the power, and that's where the most flourishing of society or civilization would naturally occur.
yeah,
uh
well, like I said, like the House of Wisdom, as I mentioned, is
mm,
in Baghdad, and it's under the patronage of the Abbasid Caliphate. So
mm,
if you have a caliph who's all about, hey, let's attract the best minds in the world to come and study here, then yeah, if you have that atmosphere and you're fine. I think the same thing happened under the Medici's, right? The Medici's were
mm,
great patrons of the Renaissance, right? So you've got to have open-minded people with money and power um, who who can shelter you or at least not directly persecute you or protect you from those who would. So there's definitely that element to it. So
yeah, exactly. Well, Jason, thank you so much. Like this has been amazing, and yeah, I just feel like I don't know, a lot more well poised than I was before to, I guess, even comment and start kind of unpacking the nuances within history of the Islamic Golden Age. But your video really, really helped in doing that. And yeah, it's the curiosity that comes with it because, again, they have their grandiose claims, and to kind of really try to place whatever we consider happened within the Golden Age in a historical context and in the wider civilizational context, it makes a lot of sense because everything is connected in some form or the other. And I think you really bring that to life in a really, really cool way, I guess, where you really can map it out and see it for what it is. And like I said, credit where credit's due. And also we got to call out their bluffs when they are bluffs. So yeah, like with anything, the truth is somewhere in the middle. It's an amalgamation of history. As Jason said as well, nothing happens in a vacuum. And I think that's something we always need to remember. But Jason, I'd love to get your final kind of remarks before we close.
I would encourage, if you like that kind of history, and you want to know more about the translators, read Richard Rubinstein's book, Aristotle's Children. The link is in the video for my influencers, and the link to The Day the Universe Changed, episode 2, is also in the description. Go watch it. It's like, watch the whole series. Like, don't just watch episode 2. Watch the whole thing. It's really, really cool stuff if you're into that. But definitely watch episode 2. The link is there. The connections that he makes, some of the points that he makes are really, really fascinating. So it's and like I said, he does it in characteristically sort of the British humor style. There's lots of subtle humorous comments he makes. So if you like that kind of stuff, so yeah, and it just I love history. I love connecting. I think it's just the way my brain works that I just see patterns and connections. You and I were chatting before. I do pub quizzes every week.
Yeah.
I tend to remember facts. Like I'll read something and then go, hey, wait a minute, I read something similar like that over there. Like that's actually how I made the connection between Spinoza and Epicurus, because when I wrote chapter 5 on Epicurus first, and then I went back into chapter 1 on classical antiquity, and I got to Epicurus, and I'm reading one of Epicurus's letters, and I'm like, holy shit, this is like word for word everything Spinoza says. So I Googled Spinoza and Epicurean, and that very month, a professor in Australia had just released a book called Spinoza the Epicurean. So I
Oh wow.
emailed him at university, and he actually sent me a PDF copy of his book, and he answered like a lot of my questions, and he helped me fine tune my arguments around Spinoza. So yeah.
Yeah. That's amazing. And I can't imagine like in those moments when you kind of, your neurons make that link and then you go back and then you realize, oh my God, that there's actually work done on this. And then to be able to connect with the author who's just done a deep dive into it. Yeah, it's incredible stuff. It's really, really exciting as well what you're doing. But Jason, how can people follow you besides your YouTube and your Medium? I know you're
So
active on
I've
Twitter.
I've got a Facebook author page. I have Twitter. I have the YouTube page. I've got Medium. I'm not that active on Medium anymore. Just I get so like over the last year and a half, I have written like 4 pages of my book in the last year and a half. I was so thoroughly drained from work that I just couldn't deal with it. So I just started editing what I already had, and then I started working on the videos a couple of months ago. And I'm now just like this week getting back to working on writing the section on the Reichskonkordat with Nazis in the Vatican and bringing it up to today. So I'm not that active on Medium, but there are articles that are extracts from the book. There are other articles that are just standalone articles. The 6-part video series on Jordan Peterson is actually on LinkedIn, or sorry, is on Medium. I did them as articles back in 2018. I've now translated that article into the videos that are coming. So if you don't want to wait for the videos, you can go to Medium and you can read the articles. I had the honor. Steven Pinker actually tweeted that Medium article out to his fans when I wrote it. So
Oh wow, that's brilliant, Jason.
Yeah.
No, that's amazing. No, I hope your work gets all the recognition it deserves and all the accolade it does deserve. In the meantime, I can try and send YouTube, like my YouTube family, over to your channel. Please, let's do our part to support Jason. And yeah, Jason, what's your Twitter handle for people to find you there?
It's where'd it go? I think it's Sylvester Report.
Yes, I think it's the same as your YouTube handle, right? If I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
Okay.
I wanted to do Sylvester Summaries, which is what's in my banner, but Twitter limits you to 15 characters, so I couldn't fit Sylvester summaries into my Twitter handle yet. So it's Sylvester Report.
Yes, yeah, I
So
just
my
checked.
summaries are my weekly reports. So I was kind of forced by Twitter to be under the 15 characters. So while my handle is Sylvester Summary, the banners are the summaries that Sylvester summaries that I do every week. So,
Okay,
and as I said, I try to keep the summaries short, but like one of them is like 21 minutes long, just because there's just so much bullshit to unpack. So
I hear that. I hear that fully. I have put Jason's Twitter handle in the description, so if you
thank
are on
you.
Twitter, please go ahead and follow him. But yeah, I've got to run as well, Jason. So I'll wrap this up, and thank you to everybody for tuning in, for all your kind of interesting comments. They really help move the conversation on, and hopefully we touched on enough areas. And I hope Jason absolutely smashed the answers to the questions that you had. Let us know what you thought in the comments, and obviously I look forward to having Jason back after he's done a bit more of his series, and we can kind of unpack all the other videos that he comes out with and just have another chat like this, I guess. But yeah, I was also going to say that I hope this was I guess, a reasonable discussion where, you know, I'm not coming from a position to want to kind of badmouth the Islamic Golden Age, or alternatively, really, really big it up either. This is just a genuine exploration of what was happening in the world, what is, you know, what's known colloquially as the Islamic Golden Age, what was really happening, are all of the Muslim claims true, what does history tell us about it? And yeah, so I hope this was somewhat of a balanced conversation, and you can take away from it what you will. There was no intent to kind of veer towards any one side. I was just picking Jason's brain based on all of the knowledge that he has and all of the work and research that he's doing. So I hope you appreciate it for what it is. Yeah, it's just, I hope to have more conversations like this as well. Thank you so much, Jason. I will message you on Twitter if that's okay. Let's talk soon.
Great. Well, thank you very much for having me on, and thank you to your followers for watching, for the questions. For those of you that have liked and subscribed, thank you very, very much. I really appreciate it. I hope you enjoy the videos. If there's a particular topic you're interested in, like, just drop a comment. You know, it might be something that's already coming up, or something that, hey, I hadn't thought about doing that. Maybe that would be a good video. So I'm happy to look into doing more stuff. But as I said, like, the book is pretty in depth. So I go into a lot of detail, a lot of footnotes. So I try to write in a way that's entertaining. That's one of the things I liked about Peter Frankopan's book, The Silk Road. That it was just jam packed full of really interesting facts, and I'm trying to do the same kind of thing. So
yeah, well, if it's if your videos are anything to go by, I'm very excited as well. Jason, please feel free to come back as well when your books are concluded or you're just about to kind of publish them. We'd love to have you on. Dr. Wolf is already saying this was very informative. We'll be looking for more of Jason soon. And 100% even Joe Walk saying, thank you, very informative and entertaining. So I think you're bang on the mark, Jason. Let's do this again soon. We'd love to host you, and maybe even do a little bit of a book reading by yourself, and then we can kind of unpack that. Yeah.
Okay.
Amazing. Anyway, have
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you also, Dale, for stopping by. Bye, everyone. Bye, John, Bernice, all my mods. Thank you for being amazing. Thank you for all your questions and all your love. Till next time. Bye, everyone. Bye, Jason.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.